In 1902, a young man named Benito Mussolini fled Italy to avoid compulsory military service. He moved to Switzerland and became heavily involved in socialist activities. He supported trade unions, wrote for socialist newspapers, and openly advocated for the violent overthrow of European monarchies. These radical actions didn't sit well with the Swiss authorities, leading to multiple arrests and deportations back to Italy. After evading military service for a while, Mussolini eventually completed his duty and briefly worked as a school teacher before returning to socialist activism. Mussolini's eloquence and powerful speeches earned him a prominent position within Italy's socialist circles. He was a staunch anti-war advocate, and when Italy invaded Libya in 1910, Mussolini protested and was once again arrested. However, the outbreak of World War I changed his perspective. Initially, he opposed Italy's involvement in the war. Still, as the conflict unfolded, he saw an opportunity for revolution. He believed the war could create the conditions needed for a broader social revolution, potentially toppling the European monarchies. Mussolini's shift from anti-war to pro-war caused a rift with his fellow socialists, leading to his expulsion from the party. Disillusioned with socialism, Mussolini began to develop his own ideology, fascism. Instead of emphasizing class divisions, which he believed were tearing society apart, Mussolini sought to unite Italians through a shared sense of nationalism. He aimed to revive Italy's former glory, harking back to the days of the Roman Empire, when Italy ruled much of the Mediterranean. Mussolini's fascist vision promised to restore national pride, expand Italian territory, and elevate the Italian people. Italy had been on the victorious side in World War I, but the Italian people felt betrayed by the meager rewards they received. The country's economic difficulties and weak government compounded the sense of dissatisfaction, creating fertile ground for Mussolini's fascist movement. In 1922, Mussolini seized the moment. He marched to the King of Italy and essentially demanded to be made prime minister, threatening to take the position by force if necessary. With this bold move, Mussolini quickly established a dictatorship with himself at the center, becoming Europe's first fascist leader. While Italy turned to fascism, Germany was in ruins after being on the losing side of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms on Germany, forcing it to cede territory, demilitarize the Rhineland, and pay enormous reparations to the Allied powers. These conditions, combined with political instability and a collapsing economy, left the German people resentful and angry. Adolf Hitler, a former World War I soldier who was fiercely patriotic, rose to prominence during this period of chaos. He viewed the Treaty of Versailles as a humiliation for Germany and was determined to undo it. In 1923, Hitler and his supporters attempted a coup in Munich, but it failed, leading to Hitler's arrest. However, his time in prison only increased his popularity, and by 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Like Mussolini, Hitler believed he was destined to lead his nation to greatness. Once in power, he swiftly established a dictatorship centered around his leadership, making him the second fascist dictator in Europe. Hitler and Mussolini shared similar ideologies, with both leaders focused on national expansion and militarization. They also shared a common disdain for democracy and communism, which made them natural allies. As their bond grew, a third power joined the mix, Japan. Though geographically distant, Japan's imperial ambitions aligned with those of Germany and Italy. Japan, having isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 2 centuries, was forced to open up to trade by the Americans in the mid-19th century. This led to Japan's rapid modernization, but also economic hardship due to unequal treaties imposed by Western powers. Lacking natural resources, Japan began expanding its empire, starting with a war against China. After securing Korea, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in 1905, establishing itself as a dominant regional power. By the 1930s, Japan had invaded Manchuria under the guise of a staged attack, and its ambitions for further territorial expansion aligned it with the Axis powers. Thus, Germany, Italy, and Japan, all driven by racial superiority and a desire for greater territorial control, formed a pact. The stage was set for a global conflict, with the Axis powers bent on challenging the Allies and reshaping the world order. Germany, under Hitler, began undoing the constraints imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt the German military in open violation of the treaty, and the Allied powers did nothing to stop him. In 1936, Hitler sent troops into the demilitarized Rhineland, fully expecting the Allies to retaliate, but once again, they did nothing. Emboldened by their inaction, Hitler set his sights on expanding Germany's territory further. Hitler's next objective was to rapidly increase the so-called Aryan population, which he believed required more living space, or Lebensraum. To achieve this, he aimed to conquer large parts of Europe, beginning with Austria. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria with little resistance, bringing it under Nazi control. Next, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a significant ethnic German population. The Allies, still hoping to avoid war, followed a policy of appeasement and allowed Hitler to take the Sudetenland, further emboldening him. Mussolini, not to be outdone, also pursued expansion. Italy invaded Albania in 1939, and Japan continued its aggressive expansion into China, committing atrocities such as the infamous Nanking Massacre. Meanwhile, Germany and Italy formalized their alliance with the Pact of Steel, signaling their unified ambitions. By now, Hitler had turned his attention to Poland. The Polish corridor, which separated Germany into two parts, was a particular point of contention for Hitler. The Allies finally took a firm stand, warning Hitler that any invasion of Poland would result in war. To avoid fighting a war on two fronts, Hitler struck a non-aggression pact with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. In this agreement, Germany and the Soviet Union secretly agreed to divide Poland between them. This pact shocked the Western powers, who had not anticipated such a partnership. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering the start of World War II. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but the Poles, despite their valiant efforts, were quickly overwhelmed by the combined forces of Germany and the Soviet Union. After Poland's defeat, the conflict entered a period known as the Phony War, where the major powers made few offensive moves. France, still relying on outdated World War I tactics, fortified its defenses along the Maginot Line, but left gaps that Germany would later exploit. Britain, led by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, also hesitated to act aggressively. Instead of bombing German military targets, the Royal Air Force dropped propaganda leaflets. Hitler, however, continued his aggressive moves, invading Norway and Denmark in 1940 to secure critical resources, particularly iron ore. The Allies, caught off guard, scrambled to respond but failed to prevent Germany's occupation of these countries. This embarrassment led to Chamberlain's resignation and the appointment of Winston Churchill as Britain's new prime minister. Churchill adopted a more confrontational approach. While Hitler prepared for an invasion of France, the Allies attempted to intercept his forces in Belgium. However, Hitler employed his blitzkrieg tactics, bypassing French defenses by advancing through the Ardennes. The German army encircled the best of the Allied forces, trapping them near Dunkirk. In a desperate evacuation effort, British civilian vessels helped rescue tens of thousands of soldiers, but France fell soon after. Hitler now turned his attention to Britain, hoping to force the island nation to surrender. He launched the Battle of Britain, an aerial campaign aimed at securing air superiority over the English Channel. The Luftwaffe initially targeted military installations, but soon shifted its focus to civilian targets in London after a British bombing raid on Berlin enraged Hitler. Despite the relentless bombing, British morale remained unshaken, and the Royal Air Force eventually repelled the German attacks, forcing Hitler to postpone his planned invasion of Britain. With the Western Front secure for the time being, Hitler turned his sights eastward, setting the stage for the next phase of World War II. Stay tuned for part 2. Like and subscribe for more videos.